Okay, a quick recording on the differences between primary and secondary sources. And if you've never heard these terms before, that's totally okay. This is what the presentation is going to be about. So we'll go over here to the first slide, and I'm going to walk through what a primary source is. The next slide is going to deal with what a secondary source is, and then I'm going to get out of this slideshow and just kind of point out some examples of both, and hopefully at the end of this you'll walk away with a pretty clear sense of, again, what a primary text is, but more importantly what a secondary source is, and why scholars use them. So as you can see here on the screen, primary sources are going to be that is the object of study, and here we're talking specifically about what humanities scholars use. So the novel, the poem, the play, in your case the song, that is the primary source, that is the primary text, it's the thing you're analyzing, it's the thing you're studying to try to, again, understand more about what it means to be human from the text's perspective. So the primary source is the thing itself. Now, to be clear, scholars in the social sciences, they do not use primary sources. Generally speaking, they do not use primary sources. Instead, they're going to have that, again, that experiment or that research design, that where they're going out and they're observing human behavior, they're gathering data from responses or things like that. So social science scholars do not use primary sources. Humanities scholars, though, do. Secondary sources, on the other hand, are those sources that have been gotten from library or internet research, or some combination of the two. The secondary source is not the thing itself. It's not the object of study, but as I think you all intuitively know, writers are going to use secondary sources to achieve a couple important purposes in a longer piece of writing. They're going to use secondary sources to establish what is known or believed about the topic. So if you're going to, as a social sciences scholar, design some sort of research project studying homeless people, then one of the things you're necessarily going to do is to go out and find a lot of other scholarship about people who are homeless, and you're going to kind of use those purposefully in the paper to kind of create or recreate the existing body of knowledge about this group of people. They're also going to use secondary sources to set up necessary contextual information. So if there are key terms that need to be defined, often writers are going to go back and look at the scholarship and use secondary sources to kind of set up those definitions if necessary. Additionally, writers are maybe going to use secondary sources to introduce perspectives or points of view about the topic. And so here, in some of these more general types of papers that teachers make students write, these like hot topic kind of papers about, gun control or abortion or, death penalty, kind of topics like that. Often secondary sources are going to be used to do something like this, so-and-so, for example, argues that gun control is a good thing. She believes that da-da-da-da, and then another paragraph where, on the other hand, writer Y argues that gun control is a terrible infringement on our basic rights as Americans, and then blah, 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 blah. So this using a group of secondary sources to kind of create an argument or a debate, this is often a real useful or necessary thing for us to be doing as writers. And again, another reason why secondary sources are used. And so then, to be clear, scholars in both the humanities and social sciences are going to use secondary sources. So, how do I get out of this screen? Good. So, just to kind of review then here, the old YouTube video here, right? The song, the text that's going to be analyzed, that is for sure going to be a primary text. This is the thing that I'm studying. I'm going to be reading it closely. I'm going to be analyzing its lyrics and ultimately then writing about it. It is the primary text. The secondary source, though, pretend for a moment that there are other scholars who have analyzed the music of this dude, Jason Isbell, and have written pieces about what the lyrics mean or what the song is about or whatever. If I was going to, with a different type of assignment than the one that I've given you all, if I've, have a longer paper where I need to, just kind of get much, much deeper into things, well, maybe I would go out and try to find what other people have written about this song and then try to position what I believe the song is about with or against what those other scholars believe. And so then that would be a very useful way of implementing secondary sources. And of course, for the purposes of your assignment this semester, we're writing about texts where there really hasn't been that kind of critical examination. And that's actually on purpose. I want you all to practice focusing on what you believe and worrying right now a little bit less about what other people might have said about the song, if anything has been written about that song at all. So, primary texts. I want to take a moment, though, and look at just a couple of examples of secondary sources. And again, I think this is going to be pretty familiar to you all. So I've got some folders here in my Google Drive. And so here, of course, is a really textbook example of a secondary source. This is a journal article. I found this article by conducting a database search, and we're going to be talking about that next week in class. And again, that's something probably familiar to you all. But we're going to talk about good strategies for finding secondary sources next week. But here you see this is just clearly a piece of professional scholarship. It's a very long article. You can see as I scroll, it's 32 pages long. It's broken up into major sections, and some of these other ones that I have here, these all come from the same journal, so they're going to look roughly the same. But again, you can see this is just clearly professional scholarship. And so this then is really kind of going to be the type of secondary source that I hope you will continue to be wanting to use in your scholarship as college students, and really kind of shying away from the whole quick Google internet search and using some piece of writing that's not really professionalized, that hasn't been sort of that hasn't gone through the ringer like this scholarship is. But we'll talk more about that a little bit later next week. The key, though, is that as a writer at the college level, you really want to have a pretty clear sense of what is a primary source versus what is a secondary source, and why you would be using one or the other, and ultimately how to. So that will do it for this one. Take it easy.